I watched my son Michael drive away with his wife and children, leaving me standing alone at a gas station 200 miles from home with nothing but my purse and a walker. What they didn't know was that by next week, I'd own the family restaurant. Chain they'd built their entire lives around, and they'd be begging me not to shut it down. Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that like button, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe because trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. This is about family, betrayal, and the ultimate lesson in never underestimating someone just because they're older. So let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Dorothy. I'm 70 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a loving family who cared about my well-being. I lived, in a comfortable senior community in Sacramento, California, where I'd moved after my husband Frank passed away 5 years ago. But to understand how I ended up abandoned at that gas station, you need to understand who I was. Before Frank died, and the life we'd built together over nearly 5 decades of marriage, Frank and I met in 1975 when I was 21 and he was 23. He was working as a line cook at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Sacramento, and I was a secretary. At an accounting firm, we'd both grown up in working-class families where every dollar mattered, where you saved for months to buy something special, and where the idea of owning your own business seemed like an impossible dream. But Frank had bigger aspirations than just working in someone else's kitchen. Even in those early days when we were dating and then newlyweds living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, he'd talk about his plans. He wanted to understand every aspect of the restaurant business. Not just cooking, but management, finances, customer service, everything. He'd work double shifts to learn from different managers, and he'd come home exhausted but excited, telling me about new techniques he'd learned or ideas he had for improving operations. I was working at Henderson and Associates, a small but growing accounting firm that specialized in restaurant and retail businesses. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly bookkeeping, payroll processing, and tax preparation, but it was steady, and I had a natural aptitude for numbers and organization that my boss, Mr. Henderson, appreciated. What started as casual dinner conversations about Frank's work and my clients gradually became something more strategic. Frank would tell me about inefficiencies he'd observed at his restaurant, and I'd share insights about what I was seeing in the financial records of our clients. We started to understand that many restaurants failed not because the food was bad or the location was wrong, but because the owners didn't understand the business side of running a restaurant. By 1978, we'd saved enough money for a down payment on a small house, and Frank had worked his way up to assistant manager at his restaurant. We were talking seriously about starting our own place, but we knew we needed more capital and more experience before we could take that leap. That's when opportunity knocked in the most unexpected way. Mr. Henderson's firm was handling the books for a struggling family restaurant called Mama Rosa's on the outskirts of Sacramento. The owners, an elderly Italian couple named Giuseppe and Maria Torino, were facing bankruptcy. They'd run the restaurant for 15 years, but Giuseppe's health was failing, and they couldn't keep up with the financial demands of the business. I'd been working on their books for months, trying to help them find a way to stay afloat, when Mr. Henderson called me into his office. "Dorothy," he said, "I know this is unusual, but I have a proposition. The Torinos are going to lose their restaurant unless they can find a buyer who can take over their lease and their debt. They're asking $25,000, which includes all the equipment, the existing lease, and the recipes. They're basically giving away a business that could be worth much more in the right hands." "That's a lot of money, Mr. Henderson." "It is. But I've been watching your work on their books, and I think you understand their problems better than they do. Most of their issues are organizational and financial, not operational. The food is good, the location is decent, and they have a loyal customer base. They're failing because they don't know how to manage cash flow or control costs." He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "I also know your husband has restaurant experience and ambition. Have you two ever talked about going into business together? That conversation changed everything. Frank and I spent weeks analyzing Mama Rosa's financial records, visiting the restaurant, and talking to the Torinos about their operations. We realized that Mr. Henderson was right. The business was salvageable with better management and some smart financial restructuring, but we didn't have $25,000. We had maybe $8,000 in savings, which wasn't nearly enough. That's when I made the biggest financial gamble of my life. I approached Mr. Henderson with a proposal. What if his firm provided the remaining capital in exchange for a partnership stake in the restaurant? He'd essentially be investing in Frank's management expertise and my financial skills, while getting a piece of what could become a very profitable business. To my surprise, he agreed. We structured a deal where Henderson and Associates would provide $18,000 in exchange for a 40% ownership stake. Frank and I would contribute our $8,000 in cash, plus our labor and expertise for 51% ownership. The Torinos would retain 9% and stay on as consultants for the first year to help with the transition. In September 1978, we officially became the owners of what we renamed Rossi's Family Kitchen. The first 2 years were brutal. Frank worked 70-hour weeks managing the kitchen and front of house, while I kept my day job at Henderson and Associates and handled all the restaurant's bookkeeping and administrative work in the evenings and weekends. We couldn't afford to hire experienced managers, so we did everything ourselves. But slowly, the restaurant started to turn around. Frank's improvements to the menu and operations increased customer satisfaction, while my financial controls helped us manage costs and cash flow more effectively. By 1981, we were profitable enough for me to quit my job at Henderson and Associates and work at the restaurant full-time. Mr. Henderson, who had become like a father figure to us, was thrilled with the success. His investment had not only paid off financially, but he was proud of what Frank and I had accomplished. When he retired in 1985, he sold us his 40% stake for a very reasonable price, making us the sole owners of Rossi's Family Kitchen. Over the next 15 years, Frank and I expanded the business carefully and strategically. We opened a second location in 1988, a third in 1993, and a fourth in 1998. Each expansion was funded through profits from existing locations, and each new restaurant followed the same formula that had made the original successful: high quality, comfort food, excellent service, and smart financial management. By 2000, Rossi's Family Kitchen was a well-established local chain with 4 locations, about 80 employees, and annual revenues of just over $3 million. Frank and I owned the business outright, and while we weren't wealthy by Silicon Valley standards, we were very comfortable and very proud of what we'd built together. But here's the crucial detail that would become so important later. Frank handled the day-to-day operations and was the public face of the business, while I managed all the finances, legal matters, and business structure. Most people, including our own children, saw Frank as the restaurant owner and me as his helpful wife, who did the books. The reality was more complicated. While Frank was absolutely essential to the business's success, I was the one who held the legal ownership structure together. All the incorporation papers, loan documents, lease agreements, and partnership contracts listed me as the primary owner with Frank as the operating partner. We'd structured it that way on the advice of our lawyer and accountant, partly for tax reasons, and partly because my background in business finance made me better suited to handle the legal and financial complexities. When our children were growing up, Michael, born in 1980, along with his older sister Lisa and younger brother David, they saw Dad as the restaurant guy who came home smelling like garlic and oregano, and Mom as the woman who helped with homework and attended school events. They knew I worked at the restaurants, but they thought of it as a job, not ownership. This perception became even more entrenched after Frank's first heart attack in 2005. He was forced to step back from the day-to-day operations, and we promoted our most experienced manager, Tony Marcelli, to general manager of all 4 locations. Frank continued as the official owner for public purposes, but he was essentially retired, and I was running the business behind the scenes. When Frank died in 2019, the children naturally assumed that I'd inherited his restaurant business and would probably sell it to fund my retirement. Michael, who had always been the most interested in the family business, approached me about potentially buying the restaurants from me at what he thought was a fair price. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't inheriting anything. I already owned it. But I was 65 years old, recently widowed, and exhausted from managing a complex business while grieving my husband. Michael seemed genuinely interested in continuing the family legacy, and he had good ideas about modernizing the operations and expanding the brand. When he proposed taking over the business, I agreed, but not in the way he thought. Instead of selling him the restaurants, I restructured the business as a partnership. Michael would handle all operations, management, and expansion decisions. He'd receive 49% ownership and would be the public face of Rossi's Family Kitchen. I'd retain 51% ownership but step back from day-to-day involvement, essentially becoming a silent partner who received profit distributions but didn't interfere with operations. Michael was thrilled with this arrangement. He got to run the business he'd grown up around. He had the freedom to implement his vision, and he didn't have to come up with the capital to buy me out. From his perspective, he was the owner of Rossi's Family Kitchen, and I was his mother, who received some income from the business as part of my retirement plan. I never corrected this perception because it seemed easier for everyone. Michael could feel like the successful business owner he wanted to be, and I could enjoy a comfortable retirement without the stress of running restaurants. The legal documents clearly stated our actual ownership structure, but Michael never really focused on those details. He was too busy expanding the business and making improvements, and expand he did. Over the past 5 years, Michael had grown Rossi's Family Kitchen from 4 locations to 7, increased annual revenues to over $8 million, and built a strong reputation throughout Northern California. He'd modernized the menus, improved the marketing, and created an online ordering system that had been especially valuable during the pandemic. Jennifer had been instrumental in this growth. She'd handled much of the marketing and social media, had redesigned the restaurant's interiors to create a more contemporary feel while maintaining the family atmosphere, and had helped Michael navigate the complex regulations and challenges of expanding a restaurant business. Together, they'd built something impressive. The restaurants were successful, profitable, and growing. They employed over 150 people across all locations. Michael and Jennifer had used the business's success to fund their comfortable lifestyle. The beautiful house, the expensive cars, the private schools for Sophia and Lucas. They thought they'd built this empire themselves, with Michael as the visionary leader and Jennifer as his capable partner. They saw me as a beneficiary of their success, the elderly mother who was taken care of through their generosity and business acumen. What they didn't understand was that legally, I owned 51% of everything they'd built. Every expansion, every improvement, every dollar of increased value. I owned the majority stake in all of it. But for 5 years, I'd been content to let them think otherwise. The business was thriving. I was receiving my profit distributions, and I was enjoying my retirement at Sunset Manor. I had my own life, my own friends, and my own interests. I didn't need to be involved in the restaurant's operations, and I didn't need to assert my ownership as long as everyone was happy. The problems started about 18 months ago, though I didn't recognize them as problems at the time. It began with small changes in how Michael and Jennifer talked about the business. Instead of referring to our family restaurant or the business Mom and Dad built, they started talking about our restaurants and the company we've created. It was subtle, but it reflected a shift in how they saw themselves in relation to Rossi's Family Kitchen. Then there were the decisions they made without consulting me. New menu items, location changes, staffing decisions, all things that, technically, should have involved me as the majority owner. But Michael had been making operational decisions for 5 years, so it felt natural for him to continue doing so without asking my opinion. More concerning were the financial changes I started noticing in the quarterly reports. Michael had hired a new accountant who had restructured some of the business's financial arrangements. There were new expense categories, different profit distribution calculations, and revised projections for future growth. When I asked Michael about these changes, during one of our family dinners, he brushed off my questions with explanations that were technically accurate but felt dismissive. "Don't worry about it, Mom," he'd say. "It's just boring business stuff. The new accountant is helping us optimize our tax situation and plan for expansion. You're still getting your distributions, so there's nothing for you to worry about." But I'd been managing business finances for 40 years. I understood boring business stuff better than he realized, and some of the changes concerned me. It looked like they were positioning the business for some kind of major restructuring or expansion that would significantly change the ownership dynamics. 6 months ago, I decided to have a formal conversation with Michael about the business's direction and my role as the majority owner. I thought it would be a straightforward discussion about ensuring that any major decisions involved my input and approval. That conversation did not go as I expected. "Mom," Michael said when I brought up my concerns, "I think you might be confused about how the business is structured now. Yes, technically you have some ownership percentage from when Dad was alive, but I've been running everything for 5 years. I've expanded it, I've improved it, I've taken all the risks and made all the decisions. At this point, it's really my business that provides you with some retirement income." "Michael, that's not how the legal structure works. I own 51% of... I know what the old paperwork says, but businesses evolve. The company we have now is completely different from what Dad left behind. I've invested my time, my energy, and my money into building what we have today. Those old ownership percentages don't really reflect the current reality." I was stunned by his response. He wasn't just misunderstanding our legal arrangement, he was actively dismissing it. "The legal ownership structure hasn't changed, Michael. We'd need to file new papers and restructure the partnership if you wanted to modify the ownership percentages. And maybe that's something we should consider," Jennifer interjected. "I mean, Michael has been the one actually running the business for years. It might make sense to formalize what's already happening in practice." That's when I realized they weren't confused about our arrangement. They were hoping to change it in their favor. I told them I'd need to think about any restructuring and that we should probably involve lawyers to make sure everyone's interests were protected. Michael agreed, but I could tell he was frustrated, that I wasn't immediately amenable to reducing my ownership stake. The family dynamics changed noticeably after that conversation. Michael and Jennifer became more formal with me, less likely to share details about the business or their plans. The casual family dinners became less frequent, and when they did invite me over, there was an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. I started to feel like they saw me as an obstacle to their full ownership of what they considered their business. Instead of the beloved family matriarch who deserved respect and consideration, I was becoming a legal complication they needed to manage. The shift became even more apparent during Sophia's birthday party 3 months ago. The conversation I overheard wasn't just about me being boring or difficult to entertain. It was about me being a burden on their lives, someone whose presence complicated their plans and limited their freedom. After that party, I made a decision. That would prove to be crucial. I hired my own lawyer. Patricia Williams was a business attorney who specialized in family-owned companies and partnership disputes. When I explained our situation, she immediately understood the potential problems. "Mrs. Rossi," she said, "you need to understand that your son and daughter-in-law may be positioning themselves to challenge your ownership stake. The fact that you've been a silent partner for 5 years while they've run the business could be used to argue that you've effectively abandoned your ownership rights." Can they do that legally? It's complicated. In most cases, Legal ownership is legal ownership, regardless of who's been managing day-to-day operations. But if they can argue that you've been inactive while they've invested significant time and money into growing the business, they might have grounds for demanding a restructuring. Patricia advised me to start documenting my ongoing ownership rights and to become more involved in major business decisions. She also suggested that I review all the financial changes Michael's new accountant had made to ensure they weren't undermining my ownership position. That review revealed some troubling information. Michael's new accountant had restructured the business's debt and investment arrangements in ways that made it appear that Michael and Jennifer had personally funded most of the recent expansion. They'd taken out loans against their personal assets and had invested those funds into the business, which gave them a legitimate claim to having increased their investment in the company. On paper, it looked like they'd invested nearly $2 million of their own money into growing the business over the past 3 years. If they could argue that this investment entitled them to increased ownership, they might be able to challenge my majority stake. They're building a case, Patricia explained. Whether they're doing it intentionally or not, they're creating a financial record that supports their claim to greater ownership. If this goes to court, they'll argue that they've been the real owners all along and that your majority stake is a technicality that doesn't reflect the current reality. That's when I realized that Michael and Jennifer weren't just hoping I'd voluntarily reduce my ownership. They were actively preparing to force a restructuring that would give them control of the business. 2 months ago, I started receiving formal notices from their lawyer about necessary business restructuring and modernizing the partnership agreement. The language was polite, but clear. They wanted me to sign documents that would reduce my ownership to 20% and give them 80% control of Rossi's family kitchen. When I refused to sign, citing the need for more time to review the documents with my own attorney, Michael called me directly. "Mom, we're trying to be fair here, but you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. We've been running this business for 5 years. We've grown it, improved it, and invested our own money into making it successful. The ownership structure needs to reflect that reality. Michael, I've been the majority owner of this business for over 20 years. I'm not going to sign away my ownership just because you've been managing operations. You're not signing away anything. You'd still have 20%, which is more than fair considering how little you've been involved in actually running the restaurants. 20% of a business I've owned 51% of for decades? That's not fair, Michael. That's theft." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Michael accusing me of being stubborn and unreasonable, and me pointing out that he was trying to take ownership of a business that legally belonged to me. We ended the call without resolution, but I could tell that Michael was angry and frustrated. From his perspective, I was an obstacle preventing him from gaining full control of his business. From my perspective, my own son was trying to steal the company I'd spent 40 years building. The final breakdown in our relationship happened 3 weeks ago, during what I now know was a carefully orchestrated family intervention. Michael called to invite me to a special family dinner to celebrate some good news about the business. He picked me up from Sunset Manor as usual, but instead of going to their house, we drove to the newest Rossi's family kitchen location in Stockton, about an hour away. "I wanted to show you how well this location is doing," Michael explained, as we walked into the restaurant. "Jennifer has some exciting news about our expansion plans." The dinner started pleasantly enough. The restaurant was beautiful, clearly successful, and the staff seemed happy and well-trained. Jennifer talked enthusiastically about their plans to open 3 more locations over the next 2 years, and Michael showed me financial projections that were genuinely impressive. But then the conversation shifted. "Mom," Michael said, "we need to talk seriously about the business ownership situation. Our lawyers have been clear that we can't move forward with the expansion unless we resolve the partnership structure." "What do you mean you can't move forward?" Jennifer leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Dorothy, The banks won't approve loans for expansion when there's uncertainty about who actually controls the business. We need clear, undisputed ownership to secure the financing we need. There's no uncertainty, I replied. I own 51%. That's been clear for years. But Mom, Michael said, that ownership structure doesn't make sense anymore. We're the ones running the business, making the decisions, taking the risks. We need to have the legal authority to match our actual responsibilities. I realized this wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush designed to pressure me into signing the ownership restructuring documents. Are you saying you won't continue expanding the business unless I give up my majority ownership? We're saying we can't continue expanding, Jennifer corrected. The banks, the investors, the landlords we need to work with, they all want to deal with the people who actually own and operate the business. But I do own the business. On paper, Michael said. But in reality, we've been the owners for years. We're just trying to make the legal structure match the actual situation. The argument that followed was the most painful conversation I'd ever had with my son. He accused me of being greedy and controlling, of trying to profit from work I hadn't done. I accused him of trying to steal a business I'd spent decades building. By the end of the evening, it was clear that our relationship had fundamentally changed. I was no longer his beloved mother who deserved respect and consideration. I was an adversary who was preventing him from achieving his goals. The drive back to Sacramento was tense and mostly silent. When we reached Sunset Manor, Michael helped me out of the car and walked me to the door, but his assistance felt perfunctory rather than caring. Mom, he said as I was unlocking my apartment door. I hope you'll reconsider our proposal. I don't want this to become a legal battle, but we're not going to let you prevent us from growing the business we've worked so hard to build. Michael, I'm not preventing anything. I'm just not willing to give up ownership of my own company. It's not your company anymore, Mom. You need to accept that. After he left, I sat in my apartment and realized that my relationship with my son and his family was probably over. They saw me as an obstacle to their success, and I saw them as people trying to steal my life's work. But I was still hopeful that we could find some way to resolve the situation. Maybe with cooler heads and better communication, we could work out an arrangement that respected both my ownership rights and their operational control. I was wrong about that too. Last week, I received a formal letter from their attorney stating that Michael and Jennifer were filing a lawsuit to challenge my ownership of Rossi's Family Kitchen. They were claiming that my inactive status for the past 5 years constituted abandonment of ownership, and that their investments and management of the business entitled them to majority control. The letter also informed me that until the ownership dispute was resolved, I would no longer receive profit distributions from the business. They were cutting off my income and taking me to court to steal my company. That's when I knew that the family I thought I had, the son who respected me, the daughter-in-law who cared about me, the grandchildren who loved me, was gone forever. But what Michael and Jennifer didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this possibility, and I was about to show them exactly what happens when you try to steal from someone who spent 40 years learning how to protect her business interests. The roadside abandonment was just the beginning. The events that led to me standing alone at that gas station in Modesto started 3 days earlier. On a Tuesday morning that seemed like it would be just another ordinary day in my quiet retirement routine. I was in my apartment at Sunset Manor, having my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee while reading the Sacramento Bee, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's number, which was unusual. He typically called on Sunday evenings for our weekly check-in, and it was rare for him to contact me during the middle of the week. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded strained, tired in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Of course not, sweetheart. I've been up for hours. Is everything all right? You sound stressed." There was a long pause and I could hear background noise, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the sounds of a busy restaurant during the breakfast rush. Actually, Mom, we have a bit of a situation, and I was hoping you might be able to help us out. What kind of situation? It's the Stockton location. We've had some major equipment failures. The main kitchen cooling system completely died overnight, and the backup generator isn't working properly either. We're looking at probably $30,000 in emergency repairs, and we need to get it fixed immediately or we'll have to close the restaurant for health code violations. I set down my coffee cup, immediately understanding the gravity of what he was telling me. The Stockton location was their newest and most profitable restaurant. Closing it, even for a few days, would be devastating both financially and reputationally. That sounds serious. What do your insurance policies cover? That's the problem. The equipment is older than our current policy covers for full replacement, and the insurance company is saying they'll only pay about $12,000 of the total cost. We need to come up with $18,000 by Thursday, or we'll have to shut down. What about the business's cash reserves? Another pause, longer this time. We've been putting most of our liquid capital into the expansion planning for the new locations. We have the money, but it's tied up in deposits and commitments for the new restaurants. If we pull that money out now, we'll lose those opportunities and probably have to pay penalties. I was starting to understand where this conversation was heading, and I felt a familiar mixture of maternal concern and business wariness. Michael, what exactly are you asking me? I was wondering if you might be able to help us with a short-term loan. Just $18,000 to cover the emergency repairs. We'd pay you back within 60 days, with interest. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only person we can turn to who understands the business and knows how important this is. Michael, you know I'd want to help, but $18,000 is a significant amount of money. I'd need to understand more about the business's financial situation before I could make that kind of decision. Mom, I can send you all the documentation you need. The repair estimates, the insurance communications, our cash flow projections. But we really need an answer quickly. The repair crew is standing by, and every day we delay costs us more money in lost revenue. There was something in his tone that bothered me, a combination of urgency and entitlement that didn't feel quite right. In all the years I'd known Michael, he'd never been irresponsible with money or prone to exaggerating financial crises. But he was also asking me to make a major financial decision within hours, without proper time to review the situation. Can you email me everything this morning? I'll review it with my financial advisor and get back to you by this afternoon. Mom? His voice took on a slightly wheedling tone that reminded me of when he was a teenager, asking for money for something he wanted, but didn't really need. This is kind of an emergency situation. I don't think we have time for a full financial review. Can't you just trust that I wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary? That phrase, "can't you just trust?" sent up a red flag in my mind. In business, I'd learned long ago that when someone asks you to make a major financial decision, based on trust rather than documentation, you should be very, very careful. Michael, I understand it's an emergency, but $18,000 is more than half of my annual living expenses. I can't make that decision without understanding all the details. Right, of course. I'll get you everything you need. But, Mom, can you at least tell me that you're willing to help if the numbers make sense? I need to know whether to tell the repair crew to proceed or to start making plans to close the restaurant. If the documentation supports what you're telling me, and if I can be confident about repayment, then yes, I'd be willing to help. Thank you so much, Mom. I'll send everything over within the hour. You're really saving us here. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at my phone and trying to shake the uneasy feeling that something about the conversation hadn't felt right. Maybe it was the timing, a major equipment failure right when they were pursuing expensive expansion plans. Maybe it was the urgency, the need for an immediate decision without proper review. Or maybe it was the way Michael had framed the request, as if my willingness to help was a given and the only question was the logistics. But I also knew that restaurant equipment failures were real emergencies that could destroy a business if not handled quickly. And Michael was my son. If he was in genuine trouble, of course I wanted to help. An hour later, I received an email with several attachments: repair estimates, insurance correspondence, and financial statements for the Stockton location. At first glance, everything looked legitimate and consistent with what Michael had told me. But as I reviewed the documents more carefully, some details started to concern me. The equipment failure had supposedly happened overnight, but the repair estimates were dated 3 days earlier. Either Michael had been dealing with this crisis longer than he'd indicated, or the timeline wasn't quite what he'd described. The insurance correspondence was also puzzling. The insurance company's letter was dated a week ago, which meant they'd known about the coverage limitations for several days. Why was Michael only reaching out to me now if this had been an ongoing issue? Most troubling were the financial statements. The Stockton location's cash flow looked strong, with healthy profit, margins, and consistent revenue growth. It seemed unlikely that a business this profitable couldn't secure a short-term loan from a bank or finance the repairs through normal business credit. I decided to call Patricia Williams, my business attorney, to get her perspective on the situation. "Dorothy," she said after I'd explained the request, "I have to ask you something directly. Have you reviewed the current financial status of Rossi's family kitchen recently?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, when was the last time you received detailed financial reports for the overall business, not just your profit distributions?" I realized with some embarrassment that I hadn't looked at comprehensive financial statements for the entire restaurant chain in over a year. I'd been receiving my quarterly profit distributions as expected, and Michael had been giving me general updates about the business's success, so I'd assumed everything was fine. "Patricia, are you suggesting there might be financial problems I don't know about?" "I'm suggesting that if your son is asking you for an emergency loan, rather than using the business's normal credit facilities, there might be more to this situation than he's telling you. Most successful restaurants have lines of credit specifically for this kind of emergency. What should I do? Before you loan them any money, I think you should request current financial statements for all the restaurant locations, not just the Stockton site. You have the right to that information as the majority owner, and you should understand the full picture before making any financial commitments." That afternoon, I called Michael back with my decision. "Michael, I've reviewed the documentation you sent, and I'm willing to help with the loan. But first, I'd like to see current financial statements for all the restaurant locations. As the majority owner, I should understand the overall financial health of the business before making this kind of commitment." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Mom, we really don't have time for a full financial review. The repair crew needs an answer today, and pulling together comprehensive reports for all the locations would take days. Michael, I'm not asking for a full audit. I just want to see the monthly statements that you should already have available. Look, if you don't trust me to handle this situation, maybe we should consider other options. I thought I could count on family to help in an emergency, but if you're going to treat this like a formal business transaction, maybe I should just go to the bank." His tone had shifted from pleading to defensive, with an undertone of guilt-tripping that made me even more uncomfortable. "Michael, this is a formal business transaction. You're asking me to loan $18,000. Of course I need to see financial documentation." "Fine. I'll get you whatever you want. But every day we delay is costing us money, and if we lose this location because we couldn't move fast enough, that's going to hurt all of us. Then get me the financial statements today and I'll give you an answer today. I'll see what I can do." That evening, instead of comprehensive financial statements, I received an email from Jennifer. "Hi, Dorothy," it began. "Michael told me about your conversation regarding the Stockton emergency. I understand your need to be cautious, but I wanted to reach out personally to reassure you about our request. I've been handling much of the day-to-day financial management for the restaurants over the past year, and I can assure you that this is genuinely an emergency situation that we couldn't Have anticipated or prepared for. The business is strong, profitable, and growing. We're not asking for this loan because we're in financial trouble. We're asking because this particular situation has caught us at a time when our available cash is committed to other important investments. I've attached the most recent monthly summary reports for all locations. As you'll see, every restaurant is performing well above expectations. We're confident that we can repay this loan quickly and would be happy to provide whatever additional documentation you need. I hope you'll consider helping us through this difficult situation. We really value your support and guidance, and we don't want this emergency to damage the progress we've made in growing the family business. The email felt wrong in several ways. First, Jennifer was now claiming to handle much of the day-to-day financial management, which was news to me. When had that happened, and why hadn't I been informed that my son's wife was now essentially the CFO of my business? Second, the monthly summary reports she'd attached were exactly that, summaries without the detailed information I'd need to assess the overall financial health of the business. They showed revenue and basic expense categories, but not the kind of detailed cash flow, debt obligations, or financial commitments that would help me understand why an $18,000 emergency was such a crisis. Most importantly, the tone of the email felt manipulative. Jennifer was positioning my request for basic financial information as unreasonable caution, while framing their request as a simple family favor that shouldn't require documentation. I forwarded the email to Patricia Williams and asked for her opinion. Her response was immediate and concerning. Dorothy, these summary reports don't provide nearly enough information to assess the business's true financial condition. More troubling is the fact that your daughter-in-law is now claiming to manage the finances of your business without any formal authority to do so. I think you need to have a very serious conversation with your son about the current management structure and your role as the majority owner. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to decline the loan request and instead demand a complete review of the business's financial management and decision-making processes. But before I could call Michael the next morning, he called me. Mom, I have some good news and some bad news. Okay. The good news is that we found another source for the emergency funding. Jennifer's parents have agreed to provide the loan, so we don't need to ask you for the money. I felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that I wouldn't have to decline my son's request for help, but concern about what this development meant for the business's financial management. That's generous of them. What's the bad news? The bad news is that Jennifer's parents are now going to be involved in the business as lenders, and they're asking some questions about the ownership structure and management responsibilities that are complicated. What kind of questions? Well, they want to understand who's actually running the business and who has the authority to make major financial decisions. When we told them that technically you own 51%, but that I handle all the operations, they got concerned about potential conflicts between ownership and management. I felt a chill run down my spine. Michael, what exactly did you tell them about our arrangement? I told them the truth, that you have majority ownership on paper, but that I've been running the business for years and making all the major decisions. They're worried about what happens if you and I disagree about business strategy or financial decisions. And what did you tell them about that? I told them that we're family and that we work things out. But honestly, Mom, this situation has made me realize that our current ownership structure is creating problems. Jennifer's parents are willing to loan us the money, but they want some assurance that there won't be conflicts between the legal owner and the operational manager. What kind of assurance? They want us to formalize the management structure so that it's clear who has the authority to make day-to-day operational and financial decisions. I understood immediately where this was going. Michael wasn't just accepting a loan from his in-laws. He was using their involvement as leverage to force the ownership restructuring that he'd been pushing for months. Michael, are you saying that Jennifer's parents won't provide the loan unless I give up operational control of the business? I'm saying they want clarity about who's running the business. And honestly, Mom, so do I. We can't keep operating in this gray area where you technically own the business, but I'm making all the decisions. It's confusing for everyone involved. It's only confusing because you've been making decisions without consulting me. As the majority owner, I should be involved in major financial and operational decisions. But Mom, you've never wanted to be involved in the day-to-day operations. For 5 years, you've been happy to let me handle everything while you enjoy your retirement. You can't suddenly decide that you want to be an active owner when it's convenient for you. I'm not suddenly deciding anything, Michael. I've always been the majority owner. The fact that I've allowed you to manage operations doesn't mean I've given up my ownership rights. Look, we can argue about this all day, but the reality is that we need this loan, and Jennifer's parents have reasonable concerns about the management structure. If you want the business to continue growing and succeeding, we need to resolve this ownership issue once and for all. And if I don't agree to restructure the ownership, then Jennifer's parents won't provide the loan. We'll have to close the Stockton location, and we'll probably have to abandon our expansion plans. Is that really what you want? I realized that this entire emergency had been orchestrated to force exactly this conversation. The equipment failure might have been real, but Michael and Jennifer had used it as an opportunity to create a crisis that would pressure me into giving up control of my business. Michael, I need time to think about this and consult with my attorney. How much time? A few days. Mom, we don't have a few days. Jennifer's parents need an answer by tomorrow, or they're withdrawing their offer. Then I guess you'll have to tell them I need more time. Fine. But I want you to understand that if this deal falls through because you're being stubborn about ownership paperwork, it's going to hurt all of us. That conversation confirmed my worst fears about what was happening. Michael and Jennifer weren't asking for my help. They were manipulating me into giving up control of my own business. I spent that evening on the phone with Patricia Williams, planning my response. Dorothy, she said, I think you need to accept that your son and daughter-in-law are actively working to take control of your business. This emergency loan situation is almost certainly a pretext to force you into a restructuring negotiation. What should I do? You have several options. You can give in to their demands and restructure the ownership in their favor. You can refuse and fight to maintain control as the majority owner, or you can consider a third option. What's the third option? You can exercise your rights as the majority owner to take full control of the business and remove Michael from his management position. The thought of firing my own son was devastating, but I was beginning to realize that he'd left me little choice. If I didn't assert my ownership rights now, I'd probably lose control of the business entirely. If I do that, would I be able to run the restaurants myself? You'd have the legal right to do so, but practically speaking, you'd need to either learn to manage restaurant operations or hire experienced managers to replace Michael and Jennifer. What about the other option? Selling my ownership stake. That's always possible, but given the current conflict, you'd probably be selling under duress at a below-market price. If you're going to sell, it would be better to do so from a position of strength rather than under pressure. We talked for another hour about my options, but by the end of the conversation, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to give up control of my business, and I wasn't going to be manipulated into restructuring the ownership to benefit people who were trying to steal from me. Instead, I was going to exercise my rights as the majority owner and take full control of Rossi's family kitchen. The next morning, I called Michael with my decision. Michael, I've thought about our conversation yesterday, and I've decided that I'm not comfortable with restructuring the ownership of the business. Mom, that's really disappointing. I was hoping you'd be reasonable about this. I am being reasonable. I'm also exercising my rights as the majority owner to make some changes in the business management. What kind of changes? Effective immediately, I'm resuming active management of Rossi's family kitchen. I'll need you to provide me with all financial records, vendor contracts, employee information, and operational documentation for all locations. What are you talking about? I'm talking about taking control of my own business, Michael. You and Jennifer will continue as employees, but all major decisions will go through me from now on. The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I wondered if he'd hung up. Mom, you can't be serious. You don't know anything about running restaurants. You'll destroy the business. I spent 20 years building this business before. You were ever involved, Michael. I think I can manage to run it without destroying it. That was 20 years ago. The restaurant industry has completely changed. You don't understand modern operations, marketing, technology, any of it. You'll ruin everything we've built. We'll see. Mom, please, let's sit down and talk about this reasonably. I'm sure we can work out an arrangement that makes everyone happy. We tried that, Michael. Instead of reasonable negotiation, you tried to manipulate me with fake emergencies and ultimatums. I'm done negotiating. What about Jennifer's parents? Loan? You can tell Jennifer's parents that the business owner has decided not to accept their loan. If there really is an equipment emergency at the Stockton location, I'll handle it through the business's normal credit facilities. And if I refuse to turn over the business records, then I'll have my attorney file an injunction requiring you to provide them. As the majority owner, I have the legal right to all business information. I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you tried to steal my business. But here we are. That conversation effectively ended my relationship with Michael and Jennifer, but it also marked the beginning of my plan to protect what I'd spent a lifetime building. What I didn't expect was how far they'd be willing to go to punish me for refusing to give up control. The roadside abandonment was their answer to my defiance, and it was about to teach them a very expensive lesson about underestimating a 70-year-old woman who'd spent 40 years fighting for what was hers. What I didn't expect was how far they'd be willing to go to punish me for refusing to give up control. The roadside abandonment was their answer to my defiance, and it was about to teach them a very expensive lesson about underestimating a 70-year-old woman who'd spent 40 years fighting for what was hers. But to understand how I ended up standing alone at that gas station in Modesto, you need to know about the 3 days that followed my decision to take control of Rossi's family kitchen. 3 days that revealed just how deep Michael and Jennifer's betrayal really went. After our explosive phone conversation on Thursday morning, I spent the rest of that day working with Patricia Williams to formalize my takeover of the business operations. We drafted letters to all restaurant managers, key vendors, and the business's bank, informing them that Dorothy Rossi was resuming active management of Rossi's family kitchen, and that all major decisions would now require my approval. Patricia also prepared legal documents requiring Michael to provide me with complete access to all business records, financial statements, vendor contracts, employee files, and operational procedures within 48 hours. As the majority owner, I had the absolute right to this information, and any refusal to provide it would result in immediate legal action. Dorothy, Patricia warned me, you should be prepared for them to fight this. They've been operating as if they own the business for 5 years. They're not going to give up control easily. I understand, but I'm not backing down. Good, but I want you to consider one more thing. If they're willing to go this far to pressure you into giving up ownership, they might be willing to take other actions to protect what they see as their business. What kind of actions? I don't know. But people who are desperate to maintain control of a valuable asset sometimes make very poor decisions. Just be careful, and let me know immediately if they do anything that seems threatening or retaliatory. That afternoon, I received a text message from Michael. Mom, we need to talk in person. Can we meet for dinner tonight? Jennifer and I want to work this out. I was tempted to refuse. Our phone conversation had made it clear that we were past the point of reasonable negotiation. But part of me still hoped that maybe, face-to-face, we could find some way to resolve this situation that didn't destroy our family completely. I texted back, where and when? How about 6 p.m. at the Stockton location? We can talk privately in C. The office after the dinner rush starts to slow down. In hindsight, I should have insisted on meeting somewhere neutral, somewhere public where there would be witnesses to our conversation. But at the time, meeting at the restaurant seemed reasonable. It was, after all, partly my business, and I wanted to see firsthand how the operations were being managed. I arranged for a taxi to pick me up at Sunset Manor at 5:30 p.m. The drive to Stockton took about an hour, and I spent the time reviewing my notes and preparing for what I expected to be a difficult but necessary conversation about the future of our business relationship. The Stockton location was impressive, I had to admit. Michael and Jennifer had clearly put a lot of thought and money into the design and ambiance. The dining room was busy but not overwhelmed. The staff seemed professional and well-trained, and the food smelled amazing. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a surge of pride in what the Rossi name had come to represent. Michael met me at the front door with a smile that seemed forced, but not entirely hostile. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us." "No, it hasn't. Jennifer's in the office finishing up some paperwork. Why don't we go back there where we can talk privately?" He led me through the dining room and kitchen to a small office behind the main work area. Jennifer was indeed at a desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and looking stressed in a way that made me wonder if the business really was in more trouble than they'd been admitting. "Hi, Dorothy," she said, standing up to give me a brief, awkward hug. "I'm glad you agreed to meet with us. I hope we can work something out that makes sense for everyone." Michael closed the office door and gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing the desk. Jennifer remained standing, leaning against the wall in a way that made the small office feel even more cramped. "Mom," Michael began, "I want to start by apologizing for how our conversation went yesterday. I was stressed about the business situation, and I said some things I didn't mean." "What specifically are you apologizing for?" "For accusing you of being stubborn and unreasonable. You have every right to want to understand the business finances, and you have every right to be involved in major decisions. We should have been including you more all along. It was a good start, but I could tell there was a but coming." "But," Jennifer continued, "we also need you to understand how difficult this situation is for us. We've spent 5 years building these restaurants into something really special. We've invested our time, our energy, our creativity, and our money into making Rossi's family kitchen successful. The thought of losing control of something we've worked so hard for is terrifying." "I'm not trying to take anything away from you," I said. "I'm just trying to protect my own interests as the business owner." "And we understand that," Michael said. "But the way you went about it, threatening to fire us, demanding immediate access to all our records, treating us like employees instead of family, that felt like an attack." "You're right," I admitted. "I probably could have handled it better. But I felt like you were trying to force me into giving up ownership of my own business. I had to do something to protect myself." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "We get that. And honestly, we've been talking about this situation for months, trying to figure out how to handle the ownership structure in a way that's fair to everyone." "What do you mean?" Michael leaned forward, his expression becoming more earnest. "Mom, we want to buy you out." That wasn't what I'd expected him to say. "Buy me out?" "We want to purchase your ownership stake for fair market value. You'd get a significant cash payment that would secure your retirement for the rest of your life, and we'd take full ownership of the business we've been running for years." Jennifer pulled out a folder from the desk and handed it to me. "We've had the business appraised by 3 independent firms. The average valuation puts your 51% stake at approximately $2.8 million. I opened the folder and found detailed appraisal reports from legitimate business valuation companies. At first glance, the numbers looked reasonable, possibly even generous. "We're prepared to offer you $3 million for your ownership. Stake," Michael continued. "That's more than fair market value, and it would give you financial security for the rest of your life. We've also talked to our attorney about structuring the payment in a way that minimizes your tax burden, Jennifer added. We could do a combination of cash and structured payments that would give you a steady income stream while also providing you with a large upfront payment. I sat back in my chair, genuinely surprised by the offer. $3 million was a substantial amount of money, far more than I'd ever imagined my stake in the business might be worth. This is unexpected, I said finally. Mom, we love you and we want to do right by you, Michael said. But we also need to be honest about the situation. The restaurant business is complicated and demanding. It requires constant attention, quick decision-making, and deep knowledge of operations, marketing, and financial management. You haven't been involved in the day-to-day operations for 5 years. Trying to jump back in now, at your age, with the industry having changed so much, it's not realistic. What we're offering, Jennifer continued, is a way for you to benefit from the success of the business without having to worry about the stress and responsibility of actually running it. You could travel, enjoy your retirement, maybe even help your other children with their financial needs. $3 million would give you complete freedom. It was a compelling argument, and for a moment, I found myself seriously considering their proposal. $3 million would indeed provide financial security for the rest of my life. I could continue living comfortably at Sunset Manor, help my other children with their mortgages or their kids' college expenses, maybe even do some traveling that Frank and I had always talked about but never managed. But there was something about the way they were presenting the offer that bothered me. The underlying message seemed to be that I was too old and incompetent to run my own business, that the smart thing for everyone would be for me to take the money and get out of their way. It's a generous offer, I said carefully, but I need time to think about it and review it with my attorney. Of course, Michael said quickly. We wouldn't expect you to make a decision tonight. But Mom, I hope you'll seriously consider it. This could be the perfect solution for everyone. How much time are we talking about? Jennifer asked. We've been in discussions with some potential investors about expanding the business, and they need certainty about the ownership structure before they'll commit to any deals. A few weeks at least. This is a major decision. Michael and Jennifer exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Mom, Michael said slowly, I need to be honest with you about something. We've already started preliminary discussions with these investors, and they've made it clear that they won't move forward unless there's a single, unified ownership structure. If we can't resolve this ownership question soon, we might lose the opportunity entirely. What kind of opportunity? Franchise development, Jennifer explained. We've been approached by a restaurant development group that wants to help us expand. Rossi's Family Kitchen throughout California and possibly into other states. We're talking about potentially 20 to 30 new locations over the next 5 years. But they won't work with us unless they know who actually controls the business decisions, Michael added. They've seen too many family businesses fail because of ownership conflicts. I was starting to feel pressured again, and I didn't like it. So you're saying that if I don't sell you my ownership stake quickly, you'll lose this expansion opportunity? We're saying that uncertainty about ownership is preventing us from growing the business, Jennifer said. And growth is the only way to ensure the long-term success of Rossi's Family Kitchen. What if I agreed to formalize your operational control without giving up ownership? We could restructure the management agreement so that you have clear authority to make day-to-day decisions while I retain majority ownership for major strategic decisions. Michael shook his head. The investors won't accept that kind of arrangement. They want to work with owners who have both legal control and operational responsibility. Splitting those responsibilities between family members is exactly the kind of situation they try to avoid. So my choices are to sell you my ownership, stake or watch the business stagnate because you can't expand. Mom, that's not how we're trying to frame this, Michael said, but his tone suggested that was exactly how he was framing it. We talked for another hour, going through the details of their buyout proposal and discussing various scenarios for the business's future. By the end of the conversation, I was mentally exhausted and no closer to a decision than I'd been when I arrived. I need to go home and think about all of this, I said finally. Of course, Jennifer said. But Dorothy, I hope you'll keep in mind that this offer represents a real opportunity for you to benefit from the success of something you helped create, without having to take on the stress and responsibility of managing it yourself. And Mom, Michael added, I hope you'll also consider what's best for the family. This conflict is hurting all of us. Sophia and Lucas are upset about the tension between us. My siblings are concerned about what's happening. Finding a solution that works for everyone would be better than continuing to fight. That comment bothered me more than anything else they'd said. Michael was essentially arguing that I should give up my business ownership to avoid making the family uncomfortable. The suggestion that I was responsible for the family tension, rather than the people who were trying to take my business, felt manipulative and unfair. I'll consider everything. We've discussed, I said neutrally. Great. How are you getting home? Did you drive? I took a taxi. Don't be ridiculous, Jennifer said. We'll drive you back to Sacramento. It's the least we can do after keeping you out so late. I hesitated. The conversation had been civil, but there was still significant tension between us. An hour-long car ride might be awkward. Are you sure? I don't mind calling a taxi. Mom, we're family, Michael said. Of course we'll drive you home. I agreed, mostly because I was tired and the idea of waiting for a taxi and then paying for an expensive ride back to Sacramento wasn't appealing. We left the restaurant around 9:30 p.m. The drive back to Sacramento would take about an hour, and I settled into the back seat of their SUV while Michael drove and Jennifer rode in the passenger seat. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was pleasant and superficial. We talked about the restaurant business in general, about Sophia and Lucas's school activities, about my life at Sunset Manor. It felt almost normal, like the family car rides we'd shared many times over the years. But as we reached the halfway point of the drive, somewhere around Modesto, the conversation began to shift. Mom, Jennifer said, turning around to face me, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How much longer do you realistically think you'll be able to live independently? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you're 70 years old, you use a walker, and you're living in assisted living. How many more years do you think you'll be able to manage your own affairs and make complex business decisions? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Jennifer, I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs. I'm not trying to be insulting, she continued. I'm just being realistic. The restaurant business requires quick thinking, constant adaptation, and the ability to handle stress and pressure. Those are challenging requirements for anyone, but especially for someone your age. Jennifer, what are you trying to say? Michael glanced at me in the rearview mirror. What Jennifer is trying to say, Mom, is that even if you don't accept our buyout offer, you're probably going to need to step back from business management sooner rather than later. And when that happens, Jennifer continued, what's your plan? Are you going to try to find someone else to manage the business for you? Are you going to sell to strangers? Are you going to let the restaurants decline because you can't provide proper oversight? I was starting to understand that this wasn't a casual conversation. They were building towards something. I'm capable of running my own business, I said firmly. But for how long? Michael asked. And what happens when you're not? I'll deal with that when the time comes. Mom, Jennifer's voice took on a tone that was simultaneously gentle and condescending. We're not trying to be mean. We're trying to help you think realistically about your situation. You're going to need more care and support as you get older. Wouldn't it be better to secure your financial future now, while you can make rational decisions, rather than waiting until you're forced to make decisions under pressure? Are you suggesting I'm not rational now? We're suggesting that $3 million in the bank would give you options and security that trying to manage a restaurant business at your age won't provide, Michael said. I realized that they'd planned this conversation. The car ride wasn't just a convenient way to get me home. It was an opportunity to pressure me in a confined space where I couldn't easily leave or end the discussion. I've already told you that I need time to consider your offer. And we respect that, Jennifer said. But Mom, we also need you to understand that this offer won't be available indefinitely. The investors we're working with have other opportunities they're considering. If we can't give them certainty about our ownership structure soon, they'll move on to other projects. How soon? We need a decision by Monday, Michael said. Monday? That's only 4 days away. I know it seems fast, but that's the reality of business, Mom. Opportunities don't wait for our convenience. I felt trapped, literally trapped in the back seat of their car, and figuratively trapped by their ultimatum. Give up ownership of my business in 4 days, or watch them lose an expansion opportunity that they claimed was crucial to the company's future. What if I need more time than that? Michael was quiet for a long moment, then said, Then I guess we'll have to tell the investors that we can't move forward because of ownership uncertainties. And that would be your choice, not mine. Would it? Jennifer asked. If you're the one refusing to resolve the ownership situation, aren't you the one preventing the business from growing? I was getting angry now. I'm not refusing to resolve anything. I'm asking for reasonable time to make a major decision about my life's work. 4 days is reasonable for a business decision, Michael said. If this was a public company, shareholders would expect decisions like this to be made in hours, not weeks. But it's not a public company. It's a family business. Exactly, Jennifer said, which is why family considerations should matter more than bureaucratic delays. We drove in tense silence for the next 10 minutes. I stared out the window at the dark farmland passing by, trying to process what was happening. They were pressuring me to make a major life decision under an artificial deadline, using emotional manipulation about family harmony and business necessity. But I was also starting to wonder if they might be right about some things. I was 70 years old. I did live in assisted living. I hadn't been actively involved in restaurant management for 5 years. Maybe trying to take control of the business now was unrealistic. Maybe taking their money and walking away really would be the smart choice. As we approached Modesto, Michael suddenly pulled off the freeway. I need to stop for gas, he explained, pulling into a truck stop with a large convenience store and multiple gas pumps. He parked next to one of the pumps and got out to fill the tank. Jennifer also got out, saying she wanted to use the restroom and buy some coffee for the rest of the drive. I stayed in the back seat, grateful for a few minutes alone to think. But as I watched Michael pump gas and Jennifer walk toward the convenience store, something felt wrong. Michael kept glancing at the store, and when Jennifer came back out, they had a brief conversation next to the gas pump that was too quiet for me to hear. Then Jennifer walked over to my door and opened it. Dorothy, would you mind getting out for a minute? I spilled coffee on the seat and I want to clean it up before it stains. I looked at the seat next to me and didn't see any coffee stain, but I got out anyway, using my walker for support. Jennifer made a show of wiping down the seat with some napkins, while Michael finished pumping gas and replaced the nozzle. Then they both got back in the car, and Michael started the engine. Wait, I said, standing next to the open passenger door. I'm not back in the car yet. Michael looked at me through the open door, and his expression was cold in a way I'd never seen before. Mom, we can't take you with us anymore. You'll have to find your own way home. For a moment, I thought he was joking. What? We've tried to be reasonable, Jennifer said from the passenger seat. We've offered you a fair deal. We've tried to explain the business realities, and you've refused to listen. We can't keep enabling your unrealistic expectations. Michael, you can't be serious. You're going to leave me at a gas station? You're a grown woman, Mom. You can call a taxi or a friend or figure out your own transportation. You've made it clear that you don't need our help or input on business decisions, so you shouldn't need our help with anything else either. I stood there in shock, holding on to my walker, watching my son and daughter-in-law prepare to abandon me 200 miles from home. This is insane. You can't just leave me here. We can, and we are, Jennifer said. Maybe spending some time thinking about your situation will help you understand that our offer is more than generous. Michael, please. I'm your mother. And I'm trying to help you, Mom, but I can't help someone who won't help themselves. He started to close the passenger door, but I grabbed it. Wait. If I agree to consider your offer more seriously, will you take me home? It's too late for that, Michael said. You've made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. And then he drove away. I stood there in the parking lot of a truck stop in Modesto, watching the taillights of their SUV disappear into the darkness, trying to process what had just happened. My son and daughter-in-law had just abandoned me at a gas station because I wouldn't immediately agree to sell them my business for the price they wanted to pay. They'd left a 70-year-old woman with a walker standing alone in a truck stop parking lot at 10:30 at night, 200 miles from home. It was the most cruel, heartless thing anyone had ever done to me, and it was about to be the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. Because what they didn't know, as they drove away feeling satisfied with their power play, was that I wasn't just some helpless old woman they could intimidate and abandon. Was a woman who had spent 40 years learning how to fight for what was mine. And I was about to teach them exactly what happened when you underestimated someone who had nothing left to lose. I stood there in the parking lot of that truck stop, in Modesto, watching the taillights of their SUV disappear into the darkness, trying to process what had just happened. My son and daughter-in-law had just abandoned me at a gas station because I wouldn't immediately agree to sell them my business for the price they wanted to pay. They'd left a 70-year-old woman with a walker, standing alone in a truck stop parking lot at 10:30 at night, 200 miles from home. It was the most cruel, heartless thing anyone had ever done to me, and it was about to be the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. Because what they didn't know, as they drove away feeling satisfied with their power play, was that I wasn't just some helpless old woman they could intimidate and abandon. Was a woman who had spent 40 years learning how to fight for what was mine, and I was about to teach them exactly what happened when you underestimated someone who had nothing left to lose. But first, I had to get home. The truck stop was busy, even at 10:30 p.m., with long-haul truckers stopping for fuel, food, and rest. I made my way into the convenience store, my walker wheels clicking on the concrete, and approached the young man behind the counter. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you help me call a taxi to Sacramento?" He looked up from his phone and took in my appearance. Elderly woman with a walker, clearly stranded, probably looking as shaken as I felt. "Ma'am, that's going to be really expensive. We're talking like 200 miles, probably cost you $400 or more." "That's fine. I need to get home." He made the call for me, but the taxi company said it would be at least 2 hours before they could send a car that far out, and the driver would need payment up front. I sat in the truck stop's small seating area, surrounded by the sounds of diesel engines and late-night travelers, and waited. During those 2 hours, I had time to think. And the more I thought about what Michael and Jennifer had done, the angrier I became. This wasn't just a family disagreement that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated act of cruelty designed to break my spirit and force me into submission. They'd lured me to a remote location, pressured me with ultimatums, and then abandoned me when I refused to cave to their demands. They'd counted on me being too old, too fragile, and too dependent to fight back effectively. They were wrong on all 3 counts. By the time the taxi arrived at 12:30 a.m., I'd made several decisions that would change everything. The ride back to Sacramento cost $380 and took 3 hours, but it gave me time to plan. I used my phone to send several text messages and make notes about what I needed to do first thing in the morning. I got back to Sunset Manor at 3:30 a.m., exhausted but more determined than I'd ever been in my life. At 8 a.m. sharp, I called Patricia Williams Dorothy, you sound terrible. What happened? I told her everything. The dinner meeting, the buyout pressure, the car ride manipulation, and the abandonment at the truck stop. They did what? Patricia's voice was incredulous. They left you at a gas station. Dorothy, that's not just cruel. It could be considered elder abuse. Patricia, I don't want to pursue them for elder abuse. I want to destroy them financially. What do you mean? I mean, I want to use every legal tool at my disposal to take complete control of my business and ensure they never benefit from it. Again. Dorothy, I understand you're angry. I'm not just angry, Patricia. I'm done being the understanding mother who makes excuses for their behavior. They've shown me exactly who they are, and I'm going to respond accordingly. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What exactly are you proposing? I want to exercise my rights as majority owner to remove Michael and Jennifer from all management positions, effective immediately. I want them banned from all restaurant properties. I want their access to business accounts terminated. And I want to explore every possible legal action against them for their unauthorized management of my business over the past year. Dorothy, that's nuclear warfare. Are you sure you want to go that far? They left me stranded 200 miles from home at a truck stop because I wouldn't give them my business. Yes, I'm sure. All right. I'll need a few hours to prepare the paperwork, but I can have everything ready by this afternoon. Good. But Patricia, there's something else I need you to do first. What? I need you to find out everything you can about their financial situation. I want to know about their personal assets, their debts, their mortgage, their credit cards, everything. If I'm going to war with them, I need to understand their vulnerabilities. I can arrange for a financial investigation, but Dorothy, may I ask why you need that information? Because I want to understand how much damage I can do to their lives when I take away their income source. Patricia was quiet again. Dorothy, I've never heard you talk like this. You've never seen me abandoned at a truck stop by my own son. 3 hours later, Patricia called me back with preliminary information from her investigator. Dorothy, you're going to find this interesting. Michael and Jennifer are in much worse financial shape than they've been letting on. How bad? They have a $680,000 mortgage on their house, which is worth about $750,000 in the current market. They have $47,000 in credit card debt across 6 different cards. They have 2 car loans totaling $85,000. Their combined monthly obligations are over $4,800. What's their income outside of the restaurant business? That's where it gets interesting. Jennifer hasn't worked anywhere else in 3 years. Her only income comes from her role managing the restaurants. Michael draws a $120,000 annual salary from Rossi's family kitchen, plus bonuses and profit. Distributions. So if they lose their positions with the restaurants, they'll be completely unable to meet their financial obligations. They'd probably have to declare bankruptcy within 6 months. And their kids' private school? $28,000 per year for both children. They've already paid for this school year, but next year's tuition would be impossible without their restaurant income. For the first time since being abandoned at the truck stop, I smiled. Patricia, prepare all the paperwork to remove them from the business. I want it served on them today. Dorothy, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we serve those papers, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son will be destroyed forever. Patricia, my relationship with my son was destroyed the moment he drove away and left me standing in that parking lot. I'm just making sure he understands the consequences of his choice. At 2:00 p.m. that Friday, a process server appeared at the Stockton restaurant and served Michael with legal papers formally notifying him that he was terminated from all positions with Rossi's family kitchen, effective immediately. The papers also notified him that he was banned from all restaurant properties and that his access to all business accounts had been revoked. Jennifer received identical papers at their home 30 minutes later. The documents also informed them that Dorothy Rossi, as majority owner, was filing suit against them for unauthorized financial management, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of business assets. The lawsuit sought full damages for any unauthorized expenditures they'd made using business funds, plus punitive damages for their breach of trust. My phone started ringing at 2:45 p.m. I didn't answer. Michael called 17 times that afternoon. Jennifer called 12 times. They left voicemails that progressed from confusion to anger to panic to desperation. I listened to every voicemail, but I didn't return any of the calls. At 6:00 p.m., they showed up at Sunset Manor. The front desk called. My apartment. Mrs. Rossi, you have visitors. Your son Michael and his wife are here to see you. Please tell them I'm not available. They're saying it's a family emergency. Please tell them that any communication needs to go through my attorney. I could hear angry voices in the background before the desk clerk hung up. 20 minutes later, they were calling from the parking lot outside my window. Mom, we know you're up there. We need to talk to you. I looked out my window and saw Michael standing next to his car, looking up at my apartment building. Jennifer was pacing nearby, talking rapidly on her phone. Several other Sunset Manor residents had come out to see what the commotion was about. After 10 minutes of shouting, a security guard approached them and apparently told them to leave, because they got back in their car and drove away. But Michael called me again an hour later. This time I answered, Mom, what the hell is going on? We got served with papers saying we're fired from the restaurants. This is insane. Hello, Michael. Don't hello, Michael me. What are you trying to do? Destroy our lives? I'm protecting my business interests. By firing your own son? By banning us from the restaurants we've been running for 5 years? By removing employees who have demonstrated that they can't be trusted? Employees? Mom, we're your family. Family doesn't abandon each other at truck. Stops. There was a long silence. Mom, look, maybe we handled last night badly. Maybe we shouldn't have left you in Modesto, but you were being completely unreasonable about the business situation and we were frustrated. You were frustrated, so you left your 70-year-old mother stranded 200 miles from home? We were trying to make a point about you needing to be more realistic about your capabilities. And I'm making a point about consequences. Mom, you can't do this. The restaurants will fall apart without us. You don't know how to run the day-to-day operations. I'll figure it out. And what about us? What are we supposed to do for work? How are we supposed to pay our mortgage, our kids' school, our bills? I suggest you figure that out the same way you suggested I figure out how to get home from Modesto. Mom, please, we can work this out. We can find a compromise. Michael, last night you offered me $3 million for my ownership stake. You told me I was too old and incompetent to run my own business. You pressured me with artificial deadlines and ultimatums. And when I didn't immediately give you what you wanted, you abandoned me at a gas station. We made mistakes. You made choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. What do you want from us? Do you want us to apologize? Do you want us to beg? I don't want anything from you, Michael. I want you to leave me alone and let me run my business in peace. And if we agree to do that, if we apologize and promise to respect your ownership, it's too late for that. Why? Because I no longer trust you, and I'm not going to give people I don't trust access to my business or my financial assets. So what happens now? Now you find other jobs and figure out how to pay your bills without access to my money. Mom, we have kids. We have a mortgage. We have obligations. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my business. We weren't trying to steal anything. We offered you fair market value. You offered me money for something that was already mine, while pressuring me with fake emergencies and artificial deadlines. That's not a fair transaction, Michael. That's extortion. I hung up. They called back immediately, but I didn't answer. Over the weekend, I received dozens of voicemails, text messages, and emails from Michael, Jennifer, and even from my other children who had apparently been recruited to convince me to be reasonable. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I spent Saturday and Sunday working with Patricia and a restaurant management consultant to understand exactly what I needed to do to run Rossi's family kitchen without Michael and Jennifer. The consultant, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez who specialized in family restaurant operations, met me at the original Sacramento location on Saturday morning. "Mrs. Rossi," she said after I'd explained the situation, "I'm not going to lie to you. Taking over the management of 4 restaurants at age 70 is challenging, but it's not impossible, especially if you're willing to hire good people and delegate appropriately." "What would that look like?" "You'd need to hire experienced restaurant managers for each location. You'd need to establish clear financial controls and reporting systems. And you'd need to be involved in the major decisions while letting the managers handle day-to-day operations." "Could you help me find the right managers?" "Absolutely. I have relationships with experienced restaurant professionals throughout Northern California. With your budget, you should be able to attract quality people." "What's my budget?" Carmen smiled. "Mrs. Rossi, you own restaurants that generate over $8 million in annual revenue. You can afford excellent management." On Monday morning, I began implementing my plan. First, I met with the senior staff at each restaurant location to explain that there had been a change in management and that Michael and Jennifer were no longer with the company. I assured everyone that their jobs were secure and that we would be hiring experienced managers to ensure smooth operations. Several employees expressed concern about the changes, but most seemed relieved to have clarity about the situation. Second, I hired Carmen Rodriguez as my operations consultant and gave her authority to begin recruiting new management staff immediately. Third, I met with the business's accountant and bank representatives to ensure that I had complete control over all financial accounts and that Michael and Jennifer's access had been terminated. Fourth, I instructed Patricia to pursue the lawsuit against Michael and Jennifer aggressively, seeking full damages for any unauthorized use of business funds over the past year. By Wednesday, Carmen had identified potential managers for all 4 locations, and we began conducting interviews. By Friday, I had hired 3 experienced restaurant managers and promoted one of our existing assistant managers to manage the 4th location. The transition wasn't seamless, but it was successful. Revenue continued at normal levels, staff retention remained high, and customer feedback was positive. More importantly, without Michael and Jennifer's salaries and benefits, the business's profitability increased significantly. Meanwhile, Michael and Jennifer's situation was deteriorating rapidly. On Wednesday, Michael called me one more time. "Mom, please, I'm begging you. We can't find jobs that pay anywhere near what we were making with the restaurants. Jennifer's been interviewing for marketing positions, but she's been out of the workforce for 3 years and doesn't have recent experience. I've been applying for restaurant management jobs, but most of them pay half of what I was making." "That sounds difficult." "We're going to lose our house, Mom. We've missed our mortgage payment this month, and we'll miss next month's, too, if we don't find work soon. The kids are going to have to leave their school. I'm sorry to hear that." Are you? Are you really sorry? Or are you enjoying watching us suffer?" "Michael, I'm not enjoying anything about this situation, but I'm also not going to fix problems that you created for yourselves." "We created for ourselves? Mom, you're the one who fired us. You're the ones who tried to steal my business and then abandoned me at a truck stop when I wouldn't cooperate. We made mistakes, but destroying our lives isn't the appropriate response." "I'm not destroying your lives, Michael. I'm protecting my business. The effect on your lives is a consequence of your own choices. What if we agree to sell you our ownership stake for nothing? What if we sign over our 49% and walk away completely?" "You don't have 49% ownership to sell, Michael. You never did." "What do you mean?" "I mean the legal documents that established our partnership 5 years ago gave you management authority, not ownership. You own exactly 0% of Rossi's family kitchen." The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. That's not possible, he said finally. Check the paperwork, Michael. You never owned any part of the business. You were the manager, not a partner. But we've been treating it like a partnership for 5 years. You've been treating it like a partnership. I've been allowing you to manage my business. This is unbelievable. You let us think we were partners while planning to take everything away from us? I didn't plan anything, Michael. I was perfectly happy with our arrangement until you tried to force me to give up my ownership. You created this situation, not me. So we have no legal claim to any part of the business? None whatsoever. And you're never going to hire us back? Never. Even if we apologize? Even if we promise to respect your authority? Michael, you abandoned your mother at a truck stop because she wouldn't give you her business. There's no apology that fixes that. Mom, please. Goodbye, Michael. I hung up and turned off my phone. 3 months later, Michael and Jennifer's house went into foreclosure. They'd managed to find jobs, Michael as an assistant manager at a chain restaurant, Jennifer as a part-time marketing coordinator, but their combined income was less than half of what they'd been making with Rossi's family kitchen. Sophia and Lucas had to leave their private school and enroll in public school. They moved out of their house and into a small apartment across town. Meanwhile, Rossi's family kitchen was thriving under new management. Revenue was up 15% from the previous year, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and I was exploring expansion opportunities that Michael and Jennifer had never considered. I'd also discovered some interesting information during the audit of the business's finances under their management. Over the past 2 years, Michael and Jennifer had been systematically inflating their expense accounts, paying themselves unauthorized bonuses, and using business credit cards for personal purchases. The total amount of their unauthorized spending was over $180,000. Patricia was pursuing full recovery of those funds through our lawsuit, plus punitive damages for their breach of trust. 6 months after the truck stop incident, I received a letter from Michael. Dear Mom, it began. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this letter. Jennifer and I have lost everything. Our house, our lifestyle, our savings, our credit rating. The kids are struggling in their new school and constantly ask why we can't see Grandma anymore. I've tried to explain the situation to them, but how? Do you tell a teenager that their father tried to steal from their grandmother and got caught? I know what we did was wrong. I know we handled the business situation badly. And I know abandoning you in Modesto was unforgivable. We were desperate and scared and made terrible decisions. But Mom, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. You've destroyed our entire lives over one bad night. Our kids are suffering for mistakes they didn't make. Jennifer is taking antidepressants and seeing a therapist because she can't handle the stress of our financial situation. I'm not asking you to give us our jobs back. I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm asking you to consider showing some mercy for the sake of your grandchildren. We could work out a payment plan for the money we owe you. We could agree to stay out of your life completely. We could do whatever you want us to do if you'd just consider helping us get back on our feet enough to provide a stable home for Sophia and Lucas. I know I don't deserve your help, but they do. Please think about it. Your son, Michael. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away without responding. A week later, I received a similar letter from Jennifer. A week after that, I received a letter from Sophia, my granddaughter. Dear Grandma, it said in her careful teenage handwriting, I don't understand what happened between you and my parents, but I miss you. I miss our family dinners and holiday celebrations. I miss having you in my life. I know my parents did something that made you very angry, and I know they're sorry about it. Could you please consider forgiving them so we can be a family again? I love you, and I hope to see you soon. Sophia. That letter broke my heart in a way that Michael and Jennifer's pleas for mercy hadn't, but it also strengthened my resolve. Because Sophia was suffering for her parents' choices, and that wasn't my fault. It was theirs. They'd gambled with their family's stability when they tried to steal my business. They'd risk their children's well-being when they decided to pressure and manipulate me. They'd chosen to prioritize their own greed over their obligations as parents. I wasn't responsible for the consequences of their choices, but I was responsible for protecting what I'd spent a lifetime building. A year after the truck stop incident, I sold Rossi's family kitchen, not to Michael and Jennifer, obviously, but to a restaurant development company that appreciated the brand's value and wanted to expand it throughout California. The sale price was $12.8 million. After taxes and legal fees, I netted approximately $9.2 million. I used part of the money to establish college funds for Sophia and Lucas, funds that would be available to them when they turned 18, regardless of their parents' financial situation or my relationship with them. I used another part to make substantial donations to organizations that supported elderly people who had been victims of financial abuse, and I used the rest to secure my own future and enjoy the life that Frank and I had always planned to have together, but never got the chance to experience. I moved out of Sunset Manor and into a beautiful condominium overlooking the Sacramento River. I hired a companion to help with daily tasks and transportation. I started traveling to Europe, to Asia, to places Frank and I had dreamed of visiting. I also started volunteering with an organization that helped elderly people protect themselves from financial exploitation by family members. Because it turned out that what had happened to me, adult children trying to pressure elderly parents into giving up control of their assets, was depressingly common. And I discovered that I had a talent for helping other people recognize the warning signs and protect themselves before it was too late. 2 years after the truck stop, I received a call from Patricia. "Dorothy, I thought you should know. Michael and Jennifer have filed for bankruptcy." "I see. They're also getting divorced. That's unfortunate. The kids are living with Jennifer in a subsidized apartment. Michael is living with his sister. How are Sophia and Lucas doing?" "According to my sources, they're adjusting. Sophia is doing well in her new school and has been accepted to several good colleges. Lucas is struggling more with the transition, but he's getting counseling through the school district. And their college funds? Still secure. They'll have full access when they turn 18, regardless of what happens with their parents." "Good. Dorothy, I have to ask, do you ever regret how far you took this?" I thought about the question for a long moment. "Patricia, they didn't just try to steal my business. They tried to convince me that I was too old and incompetent to manage my own affairs. They pressured me with fake emergencies and artificial deadlines. They manipulated me with guilt trips about family harmony. And when I didn't immediately give them what they wanted, they abandoned me at a truck stop. I know. They gambled with their family's future when they decided to commit financial elder abuse. They lost that gamble. I didn't destroy their lives, Patricia. They destroyed their own lives when they tried to destroy mine. And you're at peace with that?" "I'm at peace with the fact that I protected myself and my assets from people who were trying to exploit me. The fact that they were my son and daughter-in-law doesn't change what they did or excuse their behavior." "What about your relationship with your grandchildren? When Sophia and Lucas turn 18, they'll be free to form their own relationships with me, independent of their parents. They'll also have college funds that will give them opportunities their parents' choices might otherwise have denied. Them, I've protected their futures even if I couldn't protect our present relationship. That's very generous. It's fair. They didn't choose their parents' actions, and they shouldn't suffer the full consequences of those actions." 3 years after the truck stop incident, I was having lunch at my favorite restaurant in Sacramento when a young woman approached my table. "Mrs. Rossi? Grandma Dorothy?" I looked up to see Sophia, now 19 and looking very much like a young adult. "Sophia, how wonderful to see you. May I sit down?" "Of course." She sat across from me and I could see that she was nervous but determined. "I wanted to thank you for the college fund," she said. "I'm a sophomore at UC Davis now, studying business. The fund is paying for everything. Tuition, housing, books, everything. I couldn't have afforded college without it. I'm so glad it's helping. I also wanted to say that I understand now what happened between you and my parents. Sophia, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I'm studying business law now, and I understand what they tried to do to you. I understand that what they did wasn't just about family disagreements or business disputes. They tried to steal from you. And when that didn't work, they tried to abuse and abandon you. It was a difficult situation for everyone. Grandma, what they did was wrong. It was criminal, and I'm ashamed that they're my parents. Sophia? I know you've been protecting Lucas and me with the college funds, even though our parents' actions probably made you never want to see us again. That's incredibly kind and generous. You're my grandchildren. I love you. Regardless of what your parents did, would it be possible? Could I maybe see you sometimes? Not often, and not in a way that would cause problems with my parents. But maybe occasionally, for lunch or coffee. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I would love that very much. Good. Because I've missed you, and I've wanted to tell you, for 3 years, that what happened wasn't your fault. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. We had lunch together, and she told me about her studies, her job, her boyfriend, her plans for the future. She was smart, kind, and thoughtful. Everything I'd hoped she would become. As we were preparing to leave, she said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think you'll ever forgive my parents?" I considered the question carefully. Sophia, forgiveness is complicated. I don't hate your parents, and I don't spend my time thinking about revenge or punishment. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what someone did or pretending it wasn't serious. Your parents made choices that had consequences, and those consequences were appropriate. Do you think they've learned from what happened? I don't know. I hope so, but that's not really my concern anymore. What is your concern? Living my life fully and helping other people protect themselves from the kind of exploitation I experienced. Building relationships with people who value and respect me. Enjoying the time I have left. And your grandchildren? I smiled. My grandchildren are definitely part of the life I want to live fully. 5 years after the truck stop incident, I was 75 years old and living exactly the life I wanted to live. I had a beautiful home, financial security, and the freedom to travel and pursue my interests. I had meaningful work helping other elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse. I had new friendships and a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt since Frank died. Most importantly, I had relationships with both Sophia and Lucas, who were now adults capable of understanding the complexity of what had happened and making their own choices about family relationships. Michael and Jennifer had never recovered financially from losing their positions at Rossi's family kitchen. They'd divorced, struggled with various jobs, and dealt with the long-term consequences of their poor decisions. But their lives had stabilized somewhat. Michael was managing a small restaurant in Stockton, ironically, not far from where he'd abandoned me that night. Jennifer had found work as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit organization. They were both contributing to their children's support, and both had apparently learned to live within more modest means. I didn't take any satisfaction in their struggles, but I also didn't feel guilty about them. They'd made choices that had natural consequences, and I'd protected myself from becoming a victim of those choices. Looking back, I realized that the night they abandoned me at that truck stop was actually the most valuable thing they could have done for me, because it clarified everything. It removed any doubt about who they really were and what they were capable of. It eliminated any guilt I might have felt about protecting my assets from them. It made my choice simple and clear, and it taught me that being 70 years old didn't make me helpless or vulnerable, as long as I was willing to fight for what was mine. My son had called me a burden and left me standing alone at a gas station with nothing but my purse and a walker. What he didn't know was that by next week, I'd own the family restaurant chain they'd built their entire lives around, and they'd be begging me not to shut it down. Except that when they did beg, I didn't listen. Because sometimes, the best way to teach someone the value of what they had was to let them discover what life looked like without it. And sometimes the best revenge was simply refusing to be a victim. The truck stop in Modesto became the place where Dorothy, the helpless mother, died, and Dorothy, the powerful business owner, was reborn. It was the most expensive lesson in consequences that Michael and Jennifer would ever receive. And it was worth every penny of the $9.2 million I made when I sold the business they thought they could steal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.